courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, writes C.S. Lewis, highlighting the battle that rages within each soul. In the stillness of your heart, have you ever felt those gentle whispers of doubt, fear, and temptation, luring you away from the path of truth and light? Beneath the surface of daily struggles, there is a spiritual conflict, a battle between surrender to divine love and succumbing to darkness. It is in this deep tension that Lewis's The Screwtape letters finds its power, revealing how the enemy works tirelessly to sow confusion, indifference, and hopelessness. In the letters exchanged between Screwtape, the seasoned devil, and his young protege, Wormwood, we see the cunning strategies of hell unfold. These are not overtly wicked plans, but subtle and insidious traps, leading one to believe that the smallest of compromises are harmless. Isn't this the struggle we all face? The temptations aren't always grand or glaring. They're whispers that suggest it's easier to skip a prayer, to neglect forgiveness, to choose convenience over truth. Lewis's satire illuminates this war of the soul, where heaven and hell are in stark contrast, and where small temptations become cracks in our spiritual armor. Screwtape calls God the enemy, twisting perspectives to expose how every act of surrender to divine love is viewed as a threat to the forces of darkness. But what if the pain you carry, the struggles, the regrets, the unspoken fears is precisely where the battle lies? Lewis uses irony to peel back the layers of human experience, uncovering how the devil aims to ensnare the soul, not with obvious evils but with distractions, busyness, and an endless hunger for comfort. The devil's ultimate goal isn't merely to tempt you with blatant sin, but to lead you gently down a path of spiritual numbness, a state where your desires for God become weaker, where apathy takes root, and where life's anxieties choke out hope and faith. It's a slow fade, a gentle slope as Lewis calls it, that subtly distances you from God's light without you realizing it. And so the question remains, in the midst of life's noise, how do you guard your heart? How do you stay awake to the desires deep within, the longing for meaning, love, and connection with God? In the Screwtape letters, Lewis challenges us to recognize the battle lines drawn around our desires. Screwtape teaches Wormwood to exploit human weaknesses, selfishness disguised as self-care, pride masked as humility, and even overzealousness as a tool to exhaust faith. Lewis's insight speaks to the hidden pain in all of us, the fear of failing, the need to belong, the struggle to find purpose. And yet, it is precisely these struggles that point us toward a deeper truth, the call to conscious, deliberate faith. Lewis doesn't leave us in despair. Instead, he paints a picture of hope. Each small choice to love, to forgive, to seek God in the ordinary moments of life becomes a victory over temptation. And it's not just about being good, but about being fully awake to God's presence in all things, even when life feels dry or lonely. It is in these moments of dryness that your faith is refined, and when you press through this darkness, you find a deeper reliance on God, not based on fleeting emotions, but on unwavering trust. So stay with us on this journey. There is more to discover, more to understand about how you can overcome these subtle attacks and strengthen your walk with God. If these reflections resonate with you, if they touch on the pain and longing in your soul for a deeper, more meaningful life, please like this video, comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to continue walking with us through these powerful teachings. Let's build a community of faith that supports one another, standing firm against the gentle slopes that would pull us away from our true calling. Keep listening, there is hope beyond the whispers. Can I hear a hallelujah from you? Seeking true freedom, embracing the silence in spiritual growth. How often do we find ourselves longing for freedom yet feeling trapped by our own desires and emotions? In C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape letters, the concept of true freedom is explored not as something bestowed without effort, but as a journey requiring intention, conscious choice, and steadfastness. God, in His desire for genuine freedom, does not program our hearts or dictate our habits to make devotion effortless. Instead, He permits us the profound gift of choice, even when that means stumbling through spiritual deserts. Are there moments in your life when faith feels like a dry, desolate path, one where the warmth of God's presence seems absent and the initial fervor of belief seems to fade into a silent void. Lewis profoundly touches upon this spiritual dryness, hinting at its dual nature, a test and an opportunity. This dry phase can often be unsettling, for it strips away the comfort of emotionally charged faith, leaving behind a journey that may feel solitary, devoid of the immediate satisfaction that spiritual highs provide. It's here that Screwtape, the devilish tempter, sees an opening, those dry seasons when devotion lacks its fervent glow and appears more like an arduous uphill climb. Have you ever felt that disorientation, that void where once faith was effortless and comforting? It's in these moments, when the feelings wane, that temptation has its strongest pull. But here's where the beauty lies: overcoming these dry spells refines and strengthens faith, moving it beyond fluctuating emotions to become a conscious, resilient commitment. Lewis describes this transition as the maturation of faith, where love for God is no longer just a feeling but a determined decision, much like the steadfastness of marriage that stands firm even when the initial passion dims. This conscious growth makes a person less susceptible to temptation, for their faith is not a mere reaction to emotions but a deliberate choice, an unshakable anchor in life's turbulence. What if, instead of resisting or fearing those dry spells, we saw them as opportunities for growth, where God quietly steps back, allowing us to seek Him beyond the surface of fleeting feelings? True freedom, then, lies not in emotional highs but in choosing God amidst silence and solitude, transforming wavering faith into unwavering conviction. It's in the stillness of spiritual deserts that our deepest roots are formed, preparing us to stand firm when storms arise. Small choices, subtle consequences. C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape letters, exposes a profound truth about the deceptive nature of sin. How often do we overlook the small compromises in our daily lives, dismissing them as insignificant? Screwtape, the senior demon, warns his apprentice Wormwood not to underestimate these small sins that seem so harmless at first. It's not the spectacular acts of wickedness that are the most dangerous, but the subtle, almost imperceptible decisions that lead us, step by step, away from the enemy God. It raises a compelling question: what are the seemingly innocent actions that might be pulling us away from God's light without our awareness? Lewis makes us ponder the idea that a gentle slope can be far more perilous than a steep drop. Why? Because when the journey to ruin is gradual, without sharp turns or milestones to awaken our senses, we often fail to realize the damage being done. In fact, the small decisions, the moments we choose convenience over conviction, comfort over character, are what build up a path to spiritual darkness. These are the choices that seem too trivial to matter, yet they accumulate like drops of water, eventually forming a river that separates us from the divine. Murder is no better than cards if cards can do the trick, Screwtape observes. This stark analogy highlights how minor distractions or seemingly trivial diversions can be just as spiritually devastating as grand sins, as long as they pull us away from God's presence. Consider the seemingly innocent habits we indulge. Do they subtly erode our faith or cultivate a deeper bond with God? Lewis challenges us to reflect on our daily walk. Are we gradually being nudged away from God's path, or are we taking intentional steps toward His light? The real danger lies in the ordinary, the day-to-day decisions that appear harmless. The sin of complacency, of neglecting spiritual vigilance, can slowly erode our connection to God. Screwtape's warning, then, is a call to awaken to the subtleties of our spiritual journey. Are we mindful of how our small choices shape our soul? Are we on guard against the gentle slope that might lead us away from God's loving embrace without even realizing it? The path to spiritual ruin is often silent, gradual, and undetected, but so too can be the road back to grace, paved with intentional, conscious steps towards God. Faith in the absence of desire. Consider this: what does it mean to walk in faith when all desire is gone? C.S. Lewis, in his profound work The Screwtape Letters, paints a vivid image of a soul at its most vulnerable, standing on the edge of despair, feeling forsaken, yet still willing to choose obedience. It is a faith not fueled by spiritual ecstasy or the comfort of God's palpable presence, but by sheer will. Do not be deceived, Wormwood Screwtape warns. The great danger for darkness is when a human, stripped of all spiritual warmth, peers into a universe seemingly barren of God's trace and yet, with trembling resolve, chooses to obey His will. This is not a faith that blooms from visible miracles or burning desires. It is the faith that persists in the wilderness, where doubt reigns and silence feels louder than any divine word. How often do we find ourselves questioning God's presence when all the signs seem to point to His absence? Lewis suggests that it is in these moments when faith is deprived of emotional confirmation that its true power is revealed. This obedience without the assurance of reward or the evidence of His nearness is an act of pure surrender, a submission that defies logic and feeling, much like Job, who sat amidst ashes and loss, yet refused to curse God. Such faith hinges not on what is felt, but on what is willed. And in that choice, in that obedience born from the depths of emptiness, lies a strength that the enemy fears most. It is the unwavering resolve to cling to God's will, despite every voice of doubt, that represents the deepest form of faith, a faith that does not rely on the comfort of signs but finds its life in the simple, silent act of trust. Suspense and anxiety as obstacles to faith. How often do we find ourselves trapped in the cycle of what-ifs and what might be? C.S. Lewis, through the voice of Screwtape in the Screwtape Letters, unearths a subtle yet powerful spiritual dilemma. Anxiety and suspense are potent tools that can cloud our hearts and minds, preventing us from truly connecting with God. There is nothing like suspense and anxiety for barricading a human's mind against the enemy, Screwtape suggests. But have you ever wondered why anxiety has such a grip on our thoughts? Why do our minds race toward the unknown, leaving us restless and distracted? Lewis reveals that God, the enemy, in Screwtape's terms, wants us to be rooted in what we do now, the actions that define our faith and character. Yet, the forces opposed to spiritual growth aim to drag our attention away from the present, to build up castles of fear and doubt around what might lie ahead. When we fixate on the future, on endless possibilities and potential dangers, our focus drifts away from living out our beliefs here and now. It's as though the present becomes a shadow, eclipsed by imagined troubles. Lewis's insight reminds us that to be obsessed with the future is to starve our spiritual lives of their necessary fuel: prayer, reflection, and godly actions in the present. So ask yourself, when was the last time you found peace in simply doing what is right today? When anxiety about tomorrow paralyzes, it strips away our freedom to act, to serve, and to rest in God's plan. And perhaps the most challenging aspect is that these fears are often just whispers of possibilities, shadows that may never solidify into reality. In this lies the tragedy: our worries drain our strength and faith, distracting us from God's assurances and leading us into a life consumed by uncertainty rather than trust. Lewis challenges us to break the barriers of suspense and anxiety by reclaiming our minds and hearts for the present. To surrender our fears is not to neglect the future, but to trust it to God's hands while living faithfully today. Suspense and anxiety, the mind's chains. How often do we find ourselves imprisoned by the what-ifs of life? C.S. Lewis, through the words of Screwtape in the Screwtape Letters, paints a vivid picture of this mental struggle. He speaks of suspense and anxiety as chains that keep the human soul bound, preventing true communion with God. The subtlety of this trap lies in its ability to shift our focus from present action to an imagined future, one filled with fears, uncertainties, and endless what-ifs. God's call is to live fully in the present, grounded in actions that reflect faith, trust, and love. But anxiety distracts, leading us to build imaginary worlds filled with dread and insecurity. Have you ever felt paralyzed by the thought of what tomorrow may bring? Lewis brilliantly captures this tension, showing how worry can leave one spiritually depleted, unable to engage in prayer, reflection, or even simple acts of love. It's as though fear steals our ability to be still and know God's presence. The enemy's strategy is clear: if your mind is consumed with the unknown future, it is impossible to act in the here and now. So, what can you do? Recognize that every moment spent in anxiety is a moment taken away from faith-filled action. Acknowledge the fear, but resist letting it dictate your thoughts or rob you of God's peace. Embrace the present as a gift and trust that God, who knows all things, holds your future securely. Through surrender, you reclaim the spiritual space needed for meaningful prayer and reflection, aligning your heart once again with His purpose. The illusion of worldly comfort. Is it possible that the very comfort we seek becomes a snare to our souls? C.S. Lewis poignantly warns of this in the Screwtape letters, where the subtle danger of prosperity is laid bare. Prosperity, for many, seems like a well-paved path toward stability, happiness, and fulfillment. Yet, as Lewis suggests, the comfort it brings may deceive us into thinking we're finding our place in the world. But what if the truth is far from that? Instead of molding our surroundings to reflect our deeper values, could it be that the world's comforts are molding us? Consider how easily we equate success with material gain. The quiet allure of wealth and the sense of accomplishment that accompanies a stable life might seem like a blessing. However, as Screwtape keenly observes, it's the world stealthily finding its place within us. We can become so accustomed to this sense of security that we start seeing it as a measure of our worth. Suddenly, spiritual pursuits and deeper truths feel secondary to the tangible rewards of life: a good job, a comfortable home, or the applause of society. Have we ever paused to ask ourselves, at what point does the world's applause become a lullaby that puts our souls to sleep? Lewis's insight uncovers a profound tension. Prosperity is not inherently evil, yet the danger lies in allowing it to shape our identity. It seduces subtly, offering an illusion of completeness, whispering that we have all we need. But does it? Or are we, in truth, absorbing the world's values: success defined by wealth, purpose tied to status, and comfort as the ultimate goal? Screwtape's cunning plan reveals that the more a person feels secure in their prosperity, the more they begin to anchor their self-worth to the world's fleeting standards. This is the true trap. Comfort makes us complacent. A person deeply rooted in material wealth might stop questioning the state of their soul, unaware of how this false security blinds them to the deeper hunger for meaning. What happens to the longing for God when it is muffled by prosperity? Are we lulled into spiritual slumber, forgetting that our real place is not found in worldly gains but in a life anchored in the eternal love of God? Lewis challenges us to wake up to recognize that prosperity can knit us to the world, but only if we let it. The deeper question is, will we let the world's comforts define us, or will we seek to find our true place in the lasting presence of God? A prayer for courage and presence amidst fear. Imagine a moment when fear looms over your horizon. Perhaps it's a fear of loss, failure, or an uncertain future. How do you respond? C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape letters, paints a powerful image of a soul aware of impending challenges, but rather than being paralyzed by anxiety, prays earnestly for the virtues to meet whatever comes. This is not a prayer to avoid suffering, but to face it with courage, prudence, and wisdom. The enemy evil forces that seek to pull one away from God fears this type of prayer. Why? Because a person who arms themselves with virtue is not easily swayed by temptation. There's a profound shift when one chooses not to dwell on future terrors, but embraces the present moment. Isn't it true that the here and now is where we find our greatest opportunities for duty, grace, wisdom, and even joy? Fear tries to pull us away from this moment, either dragging us into the past or projecting us into a fearful future, making us lose sight of God's presence in the now. Lewis reminds us that the present is where we encounter God's grace most tangibly. Each second is a divine gift. Are you praying for virtues to face your challenges? Are you finding strength in the present rather than being overwhelmed by what-ifs? A mind focused on the present is dangerous to the enemy because it finds God's grace in each breath, each act of kindness, and each decision to stand firm in faith. When we pray for virtues like courage and wisdom, we are inviting God into our fears, allowing Him to transform our anxiety into strength and our dread into deeper trust. The cultivation of such virtues makes us resilient, rooted in God's love, and shields us from the deceit of fear, allowing us to step boldly into the life God has prepared for us, moment by moment, discovering your true self through letting go. What does it truly mean to lose oneself? This isn't about erasing identity or dissolving into an indistinguishable whole, but about surrendering the clamor of self-centeredness and self-will. C.S. Lewis, through Screwtape's words, paints a vivid picture of what it means to release the grip of our egos, the endless chase for power, approval, and personal gain. It's this noise of self-will that distorts our view of who we truly are. But when we abandon that noise, as God desires, we're not left empty. Instead, we are invited into something far deeper, a rediscovery of our true selves. Give up yourself, writes Lewis in Mere Christianity, and you will find your real self. Here, the paradox becomes clear. By surrendering our desires, our control, and our relentless striving, we do not lose ourselves. Rather, we uncover the most authentic version of who we are, shaped by God's love and purpose. But how can letting go of self-centered desires lead to a fuller sense of self? It is because, in surrendering, we find freedom. Freedom from the anxieties and insecurities that often arise from self-will. Freedom to become wholly aligned with God's vision for our lives. Screwtape fears this process because it draws us closer to God, allowing us to flourish in a way that mere human striving could never achieve. When we are wholly His, we are truly liberated to be more fully ourselves than we ever imagined, living not for the demands of our own will but for the divine purpose that brings our true personality to life. This transformation terrifies the forces of darkness because it illuminates the power of a soul fully surrendered to God's grace, a soul at peace, at home, and genuinely alive. All extremes, but one lead away from the light. What is it about extremes that so easily sway the human heart away from the path of God? C.S. Lewis, through the cunning voice of Screwtape, paints a vivid picture of how even well-meaning passions, if taken to the extreme, become fertile soil for spiritual decay. All extremes, except extreme devotion to the enemy, are to be encouraged, warns Screwtape to his apprentice, Wormwood. The enemy here is none other than God, whom the devils work tirelessly to distance from humanity. But why do these extremes, ranging from obsession with career success to moral rigidity or relentless consumerism, so effectively divert a soul from divine connection? Lewis hints that balance and moderation are where God's truth is most evident, where love, humility, and grace can flourish. Any extreme, whether wrapped in the guise of fervent ideology or an innocent hobby turned obsession, can lead to chaos, a disordered life distanced from God's steady guidance. Screwtape knows that distraction is one of the most powerful tools to fracture the bond between the Creator and the created. Have you ever found yourself caught up in a pursuit so deeply that everything else, including your spiritual health, fades into the background? Such singular focus can imprison the soul, leading to isolation from God and others. When Lewis speaks of extremes, he's not just condemning what we often see as bad behaviors. Even virtues, when pushed to an unhealthy extreme, can backfire. Think of the perfectionist striving for moral purity, who inadvertently falls into judgmental pride, or the person so consumed by a social cause that compassion for those with differing views vanishes. It's as if Screwtape whispers to each of us, pursue anything in excess so long as it isn't God. So how do we escape the snares of extremism and find the life God intends? The answer lies in embracing an extreme devotion to God alone. Unlike the isolating extremes of this world, a passionate commitment to God brings wholeness, unity, and peace. As Lewis implies, true devotion to God is the only extreme that leads to balance, centering us on what is pure, loving, and eternal. Consider your life. Where might you be teetering into extremes that subtly steer you away from the heart of God? C.S. Lewis, in his provocative work, The Screwtape Letters, exposes the dangerous comfort of half-hearted devotion. Have you ever found yourself treating your faith as something to be boxed in, only brought out when it's convenient? Screwtape, the senior demon, shrewdly observes that a moderated religion, one that's limited to polite boundaries, is a great victory for the forces of darkness. Religion is all very well up to a point, the tempter declares, And it's within this point that a soul may feel falsely secure. But how secure is a faith that avoids the depth of conviction? A faith lived only when comfortable, never pressing against the grain of one's desires, is like a lukewarm bath, neither cold enough to awaken nor hot enough to purify. Lewis's insight drives at a sobering truth: faith that fits comfortably within human limits is as powerless as no faith at all. In his metaphor, the demons are quite content with this lukewarm spirituality because it amuses them. It maintains the appearance of devotion without the transformational power that true surrender to God brings. This half measure keeps the person ever circling the shallows, never wading into the deeper waters of real transformation. Lewis reminds us that true faith will always ask something of us. It will confront, provoke, and call us to live out our beliefs in uncomfortable ways. Do we not feel the tension between comfort and conviction, between the path of least resistance and the boldness of radical trust in God? The greatest danger, Lewis might suggest, is not outright disbelief, but a belief that's tame, toothless, and predictable in a world that celebrates moderation in all things. Can faith truly afford to be up to a point? Or must it, by its very nature, be all-encompassing, calling us to trust and to follow without reserve? To live a faith that isn't just a habit but a constant choice to be wholly committed, so the demons have no room to laugh. Redemption, through suffering. A deeper look. C.S. Lewis's portrayal of suffering in the Screwtape letters unveils a profound truth about the Christian experience. Suffering is not an unfortunate detour, but an integral part of the journey to redemption. What does it mean to walk a path that promises not ease, but trials? Lewis writes, through the voice of Screwtape, the enemy's human partisans have all been plainly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption. This reflects a striking reality. Faith is not defined by an absence of hardship, but often by endurance through it. Think of the times when life's trials have tested the very core of your beliefs. Have you ever wondered why these struggles persist? Why God allows suffering to carve deep marks into your life? Perhaps it is not about the pain itself, but about what that pain is meant to awaken within you. Lewis suggests that true faith withstands the storms of war, pestilence, and personal crises. It is faith that rises not despite these challenges but because of them. He implies that a faith easily shaken by disaster reveals itself as shallow, lacking the roots needed to withstand adversity. Such a belief, Screwtape cynically muses, is not worth the trouble of destroying. But how do you respond when your own faith feels fragile in the face of life's plagues and battles? What if the suffering we experience is God's refining fire, burning away the impurities of doubt and fear, leaving behind a purer, stronger conviction? Lewis's words echo the sentiment of the Apostle Paul, who wrote, "Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character, hope." Romans 5 verse 3-4. Could it be that our most significant growth happens not in the easy seasons, but in the hard, tear-filled nights? When we think our faith is on the brink of collapse, perhaps that is when it is being fortified the most. Is it possible that God, in His wisdom, uses suffering to deepen our reliance on Him, to strip away the distractions of a comfortable life, and to drive us closer to the heartbeat of His love? To question suffering is human, but to understand it as part of a redemptive process is divine. Redemption is not a passive rescue from discomfort. It is an active journey through struggle towards something greater, a process of being made whole, of learning to see life through the lens of eternity. So, let the struggles refine you, let the pain transform you, and let your faith emerge from the flames stronger, unshakable, and anchored in hope. For a faith that survives the fires of life is not merely worth keeping, it is invaluable. When we treat faith as a tool for our own agendas, we risk stripping it of its deepest meaning. What happens when our pursuit of God becomes a means to gain something worldly? C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape letters, captures this shift beautifully, revealing how easily faith can be twisted. Imagine, for a moment, that faith is no longer a journey towards a loving relationship with God, but rather a means to obtain wealth, recognition, or comfort. In essence, it becomes transactional. Screwtape points out that this approach makes a person vulnerable, not only because they lose focus on God as the ultimate goal, but because their faith becomes conditional dependent on what it can get rather than what it can give. Lewis once wrote, "Aim at heaven, and you will get earth thrown, and aim at earth, and you will get neither are we," perhaps unknowingly, aiming at the earth and losing both heaven and true peace. Faith, then, is not meant to be a stepping stone to our desires, but the very path that leads us closer to God, transcending the material world. What might we discover if we shift our focus away from what faith can do for us and instead seek faith as a way to know and honor God? The world may promise success or satisfaction as goals, but genuine faith calls us to a deeper end to find purpose beyond ourselves and live not for fleeting achievements, but for an eternal connection. The path to spiritual maturity. God cannot tempt us to goodness as demons tempt us to evil, said C.S. Lewis. For God desires a willing heart, not mere compliance. Have you ever felt like you were left to walk on your own, struggling to find your footing? It's a moment that can feel like abandonment, but could it be a call to deeper growth? Think of a parent letting go of a child's hand as they learn to walk. There is uncertainty, wobbling, and even falling, but each step is essential to mastering the art of walking independently. In the Screwtape letters, Lewis touches on this divine paradox, where God's silence is not neglect, but an invitation for us to develop strength and spiritual maturity. The temporary withdrawal of God's comforting hand is like a loving parent who knows that the child must learn to stand on their own, even if that means falling occasionally. What if those stumbles on our journey of faith are not failures, but marks of genuine progress? God sees beyond our immediate falls. He delights in our resolve to rise and walk toward Him. Each misstep becomes a part of our spiritual learning curve, a chance to choose virtue over vice, to learn, and to grow. God does not demand perfection, only the honest desire to walk forward, even when it feels like you are trudging through the wilderness. So, when you fall short, remember that it is not the stumble that defines you, but your willingness to get back up, to keep moving forward, however imperfectly. God rejoices in your persistence, not despite your stumbles, but because of them. They are the evidence of your effort and the shaping of your soul. Are you willing to keep walking, even when the path is unclear, knowing that each step, no matter how small, brings you closer to Him? The deceptive allure of diminished pleasures. In the Screwtape letters, C.S. Lewis uncovers a truth that strikes at the core of our struggles with pleasure. What if the joys we chase are simply shadows of what we were meant to experience? Screwtape, the senior demon, aims to twist our desires, leading us to seek pleasure in distorted ways that feel increasingly hollow. Have you ever found yourself chasing after a fleeting joy, only to feel emptier each time? This is the formula Lewis describes: an ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure. But why does this craving grow? Because the pleasure becomes less reflective of its creator, and thus loses its authenticity. When pleasures are rooted in God, they bloom naturally, full of life and meaning, bringing peace and fulfillment. But when severed from their divine source, they become diluted, less natural, less satisfying, and more self-centered. It's like drinking from a well that never quenches thirst. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Lewis masterfully illustrates this vicious cycle as a departure from the original, life-giving intent of pleasure. How often do we find ourselves pursuing thrills or comforts that, despite their temporary high, leave us longing for something deeper? The root of this dissatisfaction lies not in the pleasure itself, but in how we use it. Screwtape's intention is clear: disconnect us from the Maker and distort our pleasures to create a dependence on what can never fully satisfy. Is this not a reflection of so much of what we see today? A constant reaching for more, but a sense of fulfillment that always slips away. Lewis's insight compels us to ask deeper questions. What if we return pleasures to their rightful place, understanding them as glimpses of God's love and creation? What if, instead of letting our desires be manipulated into insatiable cravings, we rooted them in the truth of God's goodness? Perhaps, then, our desires would lead not to dependency but to a deeper delight in the Maker Himself, where joy is full and never diminishing. the mirage of faith's outer shell. How often do we mistake activity for depth, assuming that our actions alone define our spirituality? C.S. Lewis, in his work The Screwtape Letters, unveils a profound caution: the soul is vulnerable when content with outward forms of faith, while inwardly drifting away. Imagine the Christian who faithfully attends church, reads scripture, and offers prayers, yet fails to notice that these acts have become mere habits, hollow of deeper meaning. It's easy to adopt a new circle of friends or seek worldly amusements while believing the soul is unchanged. But isn't this the most insidious of deceits? It's as if the facade of spiritual practice creates a comforting illusion, one where the heart feels assured by actions rather than substance. Lewis's words cut deep. The safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. The subtlety lies in the quiet erosion of genuine faith. We must ask ourselves, where is the true pulse of our faith? Are our routines reflective of inner transformation, or are they but an echo of former devotion? True faith is not a checklist of religious duties, it's an ongoing surrender of the heart, constantly realigning to Christ's path. Like a river that wears down its banks unnoticed, an inward drift can subtly carry one far from the source of life. To remain vigilant, one must not only perform the acts of faith but constantly anchor the soul in Christ, finding joy not just in the doing but in the being renewed daily in spirit. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending in essence. Our thoughts, however sincere and noble, mean very little if they don't lead to action." Consider this: how often do we find ourselves filled with good intentions, plans for repentance, desires to change, resolutions to live differently, yet fail to see these intentions bear fruit in our lives? Screwtape, the demonic character Lewis created, understood a profound truth: keeping a person trapped in endless thoughts of improvement without actual change renders those thoughts powerless. It's as if the enemy knows that as long as our intentions never materialize into actions, our spiritual growth will remain stagnant, confined to wishful thinking. Why is it that good intentions alone feel so comforting? Could it be that they give a sense of movement, a feeling that we are progressing, even when our lives remain unchanged? Lewis poignantly argues that thoughts without actions are like seeds never planted. They hold potential, but lack the fulfillment of life. He brings to light a difficult reality: real change demands effort, vulnerability, and often uncomfortable shifts in daily habits and choices. It's one thing to recognize where you have fallen short, it's entirely another to pick yourself up, seek forgiveness, and take active steps towards transformation. What are those areas in your life where intention has taken the place of action? Where are you still standing on the threshold, holding back from taking the leap into the unknown where true growth happens? It is in these moments that we must remember that spiritual growth is not found in endless introspection but in bold steps of faith, moving beyond contemplation into the messiness of action. Repentance, change, and the path to becoming more like Christ all require more than a thought. They demand courage, movement, and real, tangible shifts in our hearts and lives. The message here is simple yet profound: don't let good intentions be enough. Let them be the spark that ignites the fire of action, transforming your heart's desires into a life that visibly reflects God's grace and purpose. Transformation is not just a thought but a lived reality, a journey from potential to practice. Active engagement vs. passive complacency. Have you ever noticed how a decision left unacted upon seems to fade into nothingness over time? In C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, he captures this dynamic tension between active and passive habits, urging us to reflect deeply on the choices we make or fail to make each day. When you actively choose to engage, making firm decisions and taking action, those habits grow stronger and reinforce your will. But when you linger in passive habits, merely feeling without responding, a dangerous cycle begins. The repetition of inaction not only dulls your willingness to act but numbs your capacity to feel. Lewis poignantly warns of the risk in repeatedly allowing feelings of compassion, love, or even moral outrage to slip by without response. Over time, such neglect leads to a hardened heart and a paralyzed will. Consider the analogy of a muscle. Just as a muscle gains strength with each use, so do active habits. Each decisive action, whether a small kindness, a step of courage, or a word of truth, builds spiritual muscle. Passive habits, in contrast, are like a muscle left idle. They grow weaker and wither away. Lewis's insights prompt us to ask ourselves, how often do we let our feelings of love, empathy, or righteousness go unanswered by our actions? Are we training our spiritual muscle with acts of faith, or are we passively allowing it to atrophy? The deeper warning Lewis offers is about the erosion of feeling itself. When we continuously feel without acting, we become less capable, not just of action, but of feeling those emotions with the same depth. Lewis's observation beckons us to examine our inner lives. Where are we procrastinating on action and letting our empathy go untouched? If we constantly feel but never respond, we risk losing not only our ability to act but also the tenderness of our souls, the very part that makes us truly alive, open to God, and ready to serve others. In the end, every feeling that moves us to good requires a response. Without it, the spirit grows weary and the heart grows cold. Active habits and engagement are like seeds sown in fertile ground. They take root, grow, and bear fruit over time. But passive habits are like seeds left scattered on the path, trampled underfoot and forgotten. The choice, then, is ours to strengthen our hearts through active, purposeful habits or to let them weaken through passivity. In the Screwtape letters, C.S. Lewis unveils the manipulative tactics of the demonic mentor, Screwtape, who illustrates the troubling intersection between Christianity and politics. It raises a profound question: how easily can faith be co-opted for purposes other than truth and justice? Screwtape's perspective reflects a deeper spiritual struggle, one where the aim is not the outright destruction of faith, but its subtle distortion. The suggestion is that when Christians allow their beliefs to impact political life, it can either serve the greater good or, alarmingly, become a tool for self-interest and power. The true danger, as Screwtape sees it, lies not in silencing Christianity, but in warping it into a means for worldly gain or divisive ideologies. How often do we, as individuals, unconsciously twist our faith to align with our ambitions or biases? Consider Lewis's concept of undulation, the natural ebb and flow of spiritual and moral life, where our commitment to faith can easily be redirected by the shifting tides of political passion. When Christianity becomes an instrument for a particular political stance, it may erode the transformative message of love, humility, and justice that lies at its core. If we allow the essence of Christianity to become a pawn in the realm of politics, what then becomes of its true purpose to be a beacon of truth and a model of selfless living? Lewis argues in his writings that true Christianity calls believers to transcend worldly concerns, focusing instead on the inner transformation that leads to a just and loving society. Screwtape's cynical view that a really just society would be a major disaster for demons highlights this potential for redemption and righteousness through genuine faith. Yet, how often do we see faith wielded as a means to a different end, used to divide, elevate personal agendas, or justify oppression? If Christianity is reduced to merely a political tool, then it loses its divine spark, becoming just another ideology vying for power. Screwtape's warning serves as a reminder to guard against such distortions, challenging believers to examine their own motives and to let their political actions spring from a place of genuine faith and love. In light of this, Lewis urges us to ask ourselves, is our faith leading us to greater humility, compassion, and justice? Or are we, knowingly or not, allowing it to be a vessel for our ambitions or a banner for causes that contradict its message of grace? The goal is not to detach faith from public life, but to ensure it remains a force for healing and truth, untainted by self-serving purposes. The challenge is to let our beliefs transform our politics, not the other way around, to remain rooted in God's justice, rather than swayed by the world's power. The paradox of humility's reflection. Humility is a strange virtue. It loses its essence when you notice it in yourself. C.S. Lewis profoundly unravels this paradox in the Screwtape letters, where the devil Screwtape advises his nephew Wormwood to corrupt a man's humility. How often do we fall into the trap of self-awareness, turning our own virtues into hidden snares of pride? If we stop and think, am I being humble right now? Doesn't that very thought turn into an act of self-congratulation? Humility's nature is to exist quietly, without recognition. Once you become conscious of it, humility transforms into pride. It's like looking at your reflection in a still pond. Once you disturb the water with the thought of how humble you are, the reflection distorts. But why is it so difficult for us to simply be humble without analyzing ourselves? Perhaps it is because we crave validation, even for our virtues. As Lewis puts it, as long as you are proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something that is above you. Isn't that the challenge of humility, to look up and surrender rather than down in self-reflection? True humility is not thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking of ourselves less. Yet, as we journey toward this selflessness, how do we remain vigilant against the subtle whispers that would make us prideful of our humility? The moment we become impressed with our progress, we stumble, revealing the true struggle of humility to remain unnoticed in our goodness, to shine without knowing we shine. So, how do we cultivate a humility that is pure, untainted by pride, and steadfast in its simplicity? Only through a constant turning away from ourselves and toward God, who embodies the humility we aspire to achieve. The pathways of the heart. Consider this: every thought and intention you hold, each fleeting feeling or deep-rooted conviction, moves you along a path that either leads you closer to the heart of God or drifts you away. As C.S. Lewis masterfully explores in the Screwtape letters, the battle of spiritual warfare is not fought on grand stages but within the hidden, shifting landscapes of the mind. Screwtape underscores a pivotal truth: the direction of the mind at any given moment is the crucial element in the spiritual journey, and the enemy's greatest desire is to nudge you away from the Creator, even if ever so subtly. Have you ever wondered how your daily choices, thoughts, and seemingly inconsequential moments are influencing this inner battle? In a single moment of frustration or anger, we may be pulled toward bitterness, distancing ourselves from God's peace. But in a breath of forgiveness, even when it feels undeserved, we edge closer to divine grace. Each mental state acts as a compass, either aligning us with God's purpose or allowing the forces of darkness to take root. Yet, it is not the individual thoughts alone that define this struggle, it's the accumulated tendency of those thoughts, the patterns that form, and the trajectory they create within your heart. As Lewis eloquently puts it, good and evil both increase at compound interest. That is why the little decisions you and I make every day are of such infinite importance. The focus is not simply on the morality of single actions, but the direction those actions propel you in a constant journey, sometimes gentle and unnoticed, toward holiness or further away. Reflect: are your thoughts leading you toward deeper intimacy with God, or are they inching you away? Entangled in distractions and fears? Embrace this awareness, for every whisper of doubt or faith is a step in a larger continuum between God's love and the enemy's deception. Imagine for a moment how often our stumbles, those deep mistakes and lapses we regret, serve as unexpected turning points in our lives. What if those very sins we struggle with were not just failures but catalysts to draw us closer to God? C.S. Lewis, through the satirical voice of Screwtape, uncovers a profound truth: anything, even a sin makes against us. In the long run it may seem paradoxical, but every act of rebellion against God can bring a soul to an awareness of its need for Him. How many times have you found yourself on your knees after a failure, your heart crying out not for more strength but for mercy? Lewis delves into the peculiar nature of human sin, that even our darkest choices can lead to the light of repentance and growth. The demons are frustrated by this sin, when leading to genuine self-reflection and an open heart before God becomes their defeat. Screwtape laments that when a person's wrongdoing brings them to a moment of clarity, where they see their brokenness and begin to seek God earnestly, that sin has served an unintended divine purpose. It reminds us that God's mercy is not thwarted by our failures, but rather magnified by them. Every act of turning back, every tear shed in the quiet of our hearts, becomes an act of resistance against evil, a pathway towards spiritual maturity and humility. Lewis captures the essence of this paradox beautifully when he writes in The Problem of Pain, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. Can we see our sins as opportunities to hear God's voice more clearly?" What Screwtape despises most is God's power to use all things, even our faults, to bring us closer to Him. What once seemed like a roadblock on our spiritual path becomes a stepping stone leading back to His grace. Through it, we learn that God can take even our missteps and weave them into a story of redemption, where the deepest failings can give birth to a new sense of purpose, a deeper intimacy, and an enduring faith that overcomes all darkness. Exploring the veil of false spirituality. C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, paints a vivid picture of how easily one can fall prey to the snare of false spirituality. This form of deception is particularly dangerous because it often masquerades as genuine faith. But how often do we mistake rituals for a relationship, or allow our spiritual pride to replace the humility that comes from truly knowing God? False spirituality may comfort us with the illusion of holiness, empty routines that seem devout but leave the heart untouched. Are you caught up in rituals that offer a sense of spirituality but leave your soul longing for more? This counterfeit spirituality can take many forms: an obsessive focus on ceremonies without depth, a fixation on mystical experiences that lack substance, or a spirituality that is seen only in outward behaviors without any inward transformation. Lewis wisely shows us that the enemy's strategy is to make us feel spiritually full content with surface-level religion without ever leading us to a deeper, sincere connection with God. We might ask ourselves, do our prayers seek to touch God's heart, or are they merely habits we check off daily? In his reflection on spiritual life, Lewis illustrates how an individual can be subtly led astray by a distorted focus on the self, mistaking religious activity for authentic spiritual growth. As he writes, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. A true encounter with God leads to life-changing humility and surrender, while false spirituality traps us in the empty pursuit of appearances, keeping us distracted from God's transformative work within. Are you experiencing a genuine shift in your heart, or just performing faith on autopilot? Ultimately, the purpose of spiritual growth is not to check off religious to-dos, but to cultivate a genuine relationship with God that molds us into His likeness. Perhaps it's time to look beyond the motions and traditions, to search for a faith that not only looks spiritual but feels spiritual, one that challenges, renews, and draws us closer to God every day. C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, crafts a profound observation on the dark partnership of hatred and fear. How often have you felt fear, that gnawing sense of dread, and noticed how it slowly gave birth to anger within you? Fear, in its raw form, is unbearable, a relentless, haunting pain that paralyzes the heart. Lewis describes cowardice as a vice that grips the soul, painful not just in its immediate experience but in its anticipation and lingering memory. Hatred, in contrast, appears deceptively potent. It offers a twisted kind of relief, a false empowerment. It's as though the fear-stricken soul finds in hatred an antidote, a means to regain a sense of control. Yet is it truly freedom, or just another chain? Imagine a moment of shame, where guilt digs deep into your very being. Does not hatred seem like a numbing salve to avoid facing those feelings? Lewis's insight into this perverse exchange reminds us that when fear overwhelms, the soul may cling to hatred as a desperate attempt to mask its vulnerability. But this begs a deeper question: what do we sacrifice when hatred becomes our refuge? Lewis suggests that hatred doesn't just conceal shame, it feeds off fear, intensifying the very emotion it claims to quench. The frightened individual, in this spiral, is lured to believe that lashing out through hate can shield them from fear's torment. And so, as fear increases, so does hatred, like a shadow growing in the fading light. Yet, Lewis subtly challenges us to reflect on what lies beneath this vicious cycle. Could it be that surrendering to fear and hatred only deepens the shame it aims to suppress? Hatred as a response to fear seems, on the surface, to offer relief, an easy way to anesthetize pain. But is not this path a self-perpetuating darkness, one that blinds us from seeking the true courage of facing our fears with honesty? Through Lewis's lens, we're invited to explore how these emotions intertwine, trapping the soul in an endless loop where hatred and fear fuel each other, perpetuating a deeper separation from truth, peace, and ultimately love. In such moments of darkness, might it be the time to seek a different path, one where fear is met not with hatred, but with a courage that leads to genuine freedom? Courage stands at the precipice of every moral decision, the sharp edge where theory meets reality. C.S. Lewis profoundly recognized that the world's dangers aren't mere happenstance but a deliberate stage set by God to illuminate our virtues. Have you ever wondered why the most trying moments feel like a crucible, burning away the comfortable, surface-level intentions? It's because every virtue, whether patience, love, or faith, finds its true character only when pressed against fear and uncertainty. Courage is the catalyst that pushes these virtues into action. Without courage, love remains sentiment, faith becomes mere belief, and patience dwindles into passive waiting. Lewis's insight in the Screwtape letters lays bare this truth. Courage is the testing ground where all virtues converge, and only under trial do they reveal their authentic nature. When life confronts you with peril, do you see it as an obstacle or an invitation? An invitation to embody virtues at their purest, to let courage shape them into their fullest forms. Each choice we make under the weight of adversity is a declaration: will we rise to the challenge of true virtue or retreat to the safety of our comfort? Lewis urges us to embrace these moments, not with fear, but with the courage that transforms our deepest convictions into actions that echo through eternity. Conclusion. Isn't it a beautiful thing to pause and reflect on what touches our souls? As you listen to this message, let me ask, how has God spoken to you today? C.S. Lewis once wrote, "God allows us to experience the low points of life in order to teach us lessons that we could learn in no other way." The words in this video are meant to resonate with those moments, speaking to the deepest parts of your spirit and encouraging you to draw closer to the truth. Perhaps, like Lewis, you felt that pull toward something greater, a whisper that says there's more to life than what meets the eye. If this message has stirred your heart, if it has given you even a sliver of peace or hope, I encourage you to continue on this journey with us. Let's walk together, lifting each other up as we explore what it means to live in faith and trust in God's unwavering presence. Your thoughts matter here, and your voice can become part of this growing community of believers. Consider this an invitation, a chance to stay connected, to be reminded that you are not alone, and to keep discovering those small yet significant ways God reveals His love to you. Simply subscribe, like, and turn on notifications to ensure you don't miss future moments of encouragement and reflection. And before you leave, remember there's more to explore. Let the suggested videos guide you deeper into faith's comforting embrace. Thank you for sharing this time with us. May you find peace, strength, and inspiration until we meet again.